Okay, in this video we're just going to look at focal reducers and speed boosters and why you might want to use them with your MFT camera. So in this video we're using the Panasonic GH6, but I also use the Panasonic GH5 and I use the same speed booster for that. So probably to start off, just like as a bit of background, so a focal reducer really is what these are called, but the term sort of speed booster was kind of coined by Metabones, and now everybody really calls them speed boosters rather than focal reducers, but the terminology is really sort of interchangeable. A speed booster is a focal reducer and vice versa. At least that's the case for the most part anyway, you know, but unless there's things where people are kind of getting a little confused with it, but generally when people talk about speed boosters they're usually talking about focal reducers. In our case here, a focal reducer is a tool for anyone looking to adapt full frame or APS-C glass to a MFT sensor. So the kind of benefits that you get from it are a wider field of view, and you'll also get a small bump in terms of the aperture from the lens. And that's because by having the focal reducer in between the lens and the camera, you'll actually get around another stop of light. So for a lot of people using MFT, this is really good because it kind of alleviates some of the issues that people do have with MFT. So you've got like a little bit of a reduction in that 2x crop on some of the lenses, and a little bit of an improvement in low light as well. So you know, that's two of the kind of quibbles people have with MFT sort of, you know, catered for a little bit there. And one thing I would say sort of before going into this, you know, if you've got the choice between picking native glass or adapting lenses, personally I would always say look for native glass, because MFT, there's so much good native glass that you can buy, you know, quick lenses, good AF. There are some pretty decent choices out there, and when you start adapting there are some kind of drawbacks and downsides, which I'll kind of cover in a bit. But for me, the reason I've done it is because I came originally from Canon full frame, so you know, I sold a few lenses when I switched over to MFT, but I kept a few that I really liked. So you know, one of the main ones I really enjoy using is this 100mm macro lens, and I really like doing macros. So you know, for me it was worth kind of getting the speed booster for this and a few other lenses. But like I say, if you don't have any lenses already, I'd probably just, you know, stick to native glass, and you'll end up probably getting better results. But adapting lenses can be really good for getting things outside of what's available in the MFT lineup. And I did a video about kind of adapting vintage lenses and things like that, so I'll link to that up in the corner. But yeah, so for anybody that does want to adapt lenses, this is a good solution. So with focal reducers, there is a tiny bit of maths that you need to kind of jump into it, because essentially what's happening is the focal reducer is changing the focal length of your lens, and it will also affect the aperture a little bit, which isn't, you know, it's not something you really need to worry about, because you can still shoot at the same aperture. You'll just be able to slightly alter it as well beyond what you could before. But the focal length is the main thing. So focal reducers come in sort of different magnifications. The one I've got the Viltrox. It's the EF M2 Mark II, which is a bit of a strange name, but it's essentially MFT to EF, and the magnification on this one you could probably just about see. It's a 0.71x. So this is quite a good lens to explain it for. You know, I'm not going to go into massive detail about it, but essentially with the focal reducer on, it turns this 100mm lens into effectively a 71mm lens. So the full frame equivalence of that would then be around 142mm. So yeah, that's sort of where we kind of sit with the maths on it. Obviously it gets a little bit harder when you've got zoom lenses and you're sort of trying to work out each end of it, but you'll actually see when we get it onto the camera, luckily Panasonic have added some things that actually can kind of help in that regard. I'm not sure I've got the right lens actually here, but I'll yeah, we'll go through it. But essentially what I'm kind of getting to is, rather than with vintage lenses where we lose a lot of things. With a speed booster, it can differ from cameras and lenses, but quite often we'll get the EXIF data, so we can still work with things like aperture. So what we'll do anyway, if we quickly kind of show you how this goes on. So it's a fairly standard way of adding things. So essentially the focal reducer goes into there. You've just got a red notch where you can add it onto the camera. So you can add it on like that. So when you haven't got a lens mounted on the focal reducer, you can still have it. So it's like, you know, it's almost like a clear body cap, as if you were just putting the body cap on the camera. So, you know, if you're traveling and you don't want to have obviously lenses in there, you can pop that into the sleeve of a bag quite easily, and it hasn't got like an enormous EF lens on it. And then obviously when you're ready to mount your lens, you can just take that cap off. Again, you've got a red dot on the speed booster. We can put that one on, and then when we start the camera up, we won't get the information that we usually get on manual lenses, so it's not going to ask us about stabilization. It's just kind of there, and you'll see kind of what I mean about AF. I mean, this is an older EF lens. It's not like it's a brand new lens, but when we go to focus, that was actually quite good. It wasn't too bad, but you know, it can hunt quite a lot for focus because you've got that additional bit there. But essentially what you'll see on this lens, it's I should say it on there somewhere. Yeah, it's an f2.8 lens. So when we come into the camera, you can see I can actually stop it all the way down to f2, which is great. So you know, it's already a pretty good lens. You know, f2.8 is pretty decent, but then I can actually get, you know, right down to f2, which is great. So it's actually like it's a little bump on the lens as well. I mean, particularly for this lens, because it's a macro lens, it's probably not the sort of ideal one that you kind of want to go wider on, but I do find it very useful. So I still really like it. You know, I like using this lens a lot, and I was happy to be able to bring it over from EF to my MFT cameras. But I'm just going to have a hunt around and just see if I can quickly find an EF lens. Okay, yeah, so I found this this Canon lens. So it's a zoom EF lens. I mean, this is the type of lens you probably wouldn't bother adapting, because it's probably, to be honest, in current money, it's probably worth less than the actual focal reducer. But it's still, you know, it's still quite nice to be able to adapt it. And all I really want to do is just kind of show how this works on the camera. So you can see on the lens, if I held it in front of the camera, 28 to 135mm lens. So it's a good focal range, but then we just need to remember as well, it's a times 0.71, and then luckily, hang on, I've not actually attached that properly. Sorry, focal reducer's not actually attached. And then what I'm going to do is just do that. Don't worry too much about the zoom on this lens. It is a pretty ragged lens, and it's I don't think it can actually lock from that distance. Yeah, it just needs to be a bit further away to lock, but it's not a quick AF lens anyway, so that's not really sorry, it's not really an indication of the speed booster. But this is what I wanted to show. So, you know, when you're on the full zoom, you can probably just about see the camera. This is really nice. The camera's actually doing the calculations for me. So you can see there it says 19mm, and then if I go right down to the end of the zoom range, it's 95mm. So it's effectively turned the camera into a 19 to 95mm lens. So rather than you having to do all the math and work it out, which you can do, I'll leave a little calculator in the description of that I find really good for kind of working a lot of this stuff out. But the camera's just doing it for you, you know, so you don't have to do all of that stuff yourself. You can kind of just let the camera tell you the focal lengths, which is really useful. it's probably worth mentioning as well, we've kind of, you may not know about this feature, but I'll link up in the corner actually for more explanation, but we just talk about pixel to pixel. Essentially, you'd have to be on a full area for this to really, for the focal length to be accurate, because otherwise, you know, we're still doing that, and it's still 19 to 95. But actually, because if we're in here, we're on full area, and then pixel to pixel, you can see the area of view is actually changing. So the focal length when you're in pixel to pixel is not technically accurate, you know, because it's doing a punch in for pixel to pixel. And again, you may not even use that, so that might not make any difference to you, but it's worth bearing in mind that actually, you know, if you've got that on, the focal lengths aren't going to be sort of fully accurate. And one thing to bear in mind, what I'll do is, let me just take this lens off so you can kind of see a bit better. Might be slightly difficult to see it, but on, oh yeah, you're not going to be able to see that, just a second. Let me take that off and put stick a lens back on there. Okay, so on the focal reducer itself, it's an actual piece of hardware that's communicating with the camera. So what you'll find is you usually get a little USB port on there. And I've done another video on how to upgrade the firmware on these, so I'll link that up in a corner. But yeah, you actually have to update this. So when new lenses come along or new cameras come along, usually these will actually be updated with you know, new firmware and sort of add patches and fixes for certain cameras and certain lenses. So if you ever get one of these, it's always worth keeping it up to date with the latest firmware, because you know it's going to give you the best support for focusing and everything. You will generally get a like with the Viltrox ones, there is a supported list of lenses, but it's never like the entirety of what it will support. I've got loads of lenses that work, but they're not actually on the list. So you know, it's one of those things where you can usually find out online if a lens works, or you know, like I say, most of them do. Just some of the, you know, a lot of VF lenses now are, to be honest, a little bit long in the tooth. So some of the focusing features and things like that are, you know, not as quick as they could be. So I kind of mentioned as well, you know, with the macro lens, you know, I don't mind that being a 71mm lens, but I've got zoom lenses as well for EF, and in that instance, you know, a focal reducer might not actually be, you know, your best bet, because say you've got 100 to 300, that's actually going to start bringing your lens down to you know, more like a sort of 70 to 250 or less, and it's not you know, that's probably not really what you want. You want the actual reach of the lens. You don't want it to be reduced, even though you would get that that little bump in aperture, which could be quite nice. But yeah, for that, potentially what you could do is just look at using you can get adapters that are obviously just a manual adapter, so you'd have to use manual focus, or there are actually versions of these adapters where they're not a reducer, they're literally just an adapter that supports AF, so they're like a AF adapter. I'll link to all these bits in the description, you know, and you can browse through and kind of see, because there are certain things that for some people they'll work and for other people they won't. It's all based on use case, really. You know, this isn't the perfect tool for everybody. It's, you know, for some people it's great because you can still use some of your old lenses. For other people it's not really going to fit the bill. And really, when it comes to the downsides of a focal reducer or speed booster, for me it's just one of those things where you've got you know, it's an extra layer in between the sensor and the lens, and it's a two-sided one, because sometimes it actually can make your footage look better in certain instances, but also it is another, you know, it's more glass in between your lenses, so it's something that can introduce kind of smudges, and you know, it might not make the footage as sharp in certain situations. Like I say, there are sort of two ways to that, but it is another piece in there. And for me, with heavy lenses, I find it slightly worrying sometimes. You've got this mounting point on the speed booster, but I do find it slightly worrying. So usually what I'll get is with heavier lenses, you know, you usually get a mounting point for the lens. So I'll usually use one of those because yeah, I worry slightly that you could put too much pressure on this. And that's never happened, you know. I've owned this for years and I've never had an issue with it, but it does just concern me a bit that you've got that additional sort of point of failure and point of weakness. You know, if this ever kind of broke, then you've got an issue between the lens and the camera, and you know, it's yeah, it's just something to consider. But yeah, hopefully this wasn't too sort of too long, and it made sense. You know, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, and I'll try to help. And if this video's helped, please give it a like. If you want to see more videos like this, then please subscribe.